My friends, history is not written in the abstract. It is written in the theater of human experience, in the movements of nations, in the cries of the oppressed, in the upheavals of creation itself. And for those who pay attention not with eyes clouded by distraction, but with eyes sharpened by discernment, it is clear that what the prophets spoke about has moved from theory into reality. When we speak of the last rapture sign, we are not engaging in sensationalism. We are simply acknowledging that the stage of history has reached its final scene. There is no need to guess, for the evidence is before us. The last prophetic signal, the very one that Scripture placed at the threshold of eternity, has already appeared. It is easy to dismiss this as exaggeration, as religious zealotry, or as the rant of those who see storms where there are merely clouds. But let us reason together. Every prophecy up until this point has found its fulfillment in its season. Kingdoms rose and fell as foretold. Israel scattered and gathered just as it was written. Wars and rumors of wars, pestilence and global shaking, have these not become our daily headlines? What makes us think that this final sign would be the only prophecy left hanging, unfulfilled, while every other has come to pass? No, my friends, the consistency of God's word is such that what he has spoken must be accomplished. And so, when the last sign appears, it is not the sound of conspiracy, it is the sound of completion. Imagine a symphony in which every instrument has played its part. The violins have wept their sorrowful notes. The trumpets have sounded their warnings. The drums have beat their rhythms of war and unrest. And then, at the appointed moment, the conductor lifts his hand for the final note. That note has been struck. The last sign is that note. To ignore it is to ignore the hand of the divine conductor orchestrating history toward its appointed climax. But why is it so difficult for many to recognize? It is because human beings, by nature, are comfortable with the predictable. We thrive in routine. We are intoxicated by the illusion of permanence. We convince ourselves that tomorrow will always come, that nations will always stand, that systems will always function. And so, when a divine interruption breaks through, our instinct is denial. We prefer to explain it away rather than accept that the world as we know it is running out of time. Yet denial does not erase truth. It merely blinds the denier. The last sign is not a whisper. It is a declaration. It is not hidden in the shadows. It is written in the heavens and etched in the chaos of earth. We see it in the groaning of creation, in the rebellion of nations, in the intensification of events that no longer seem random but patterned, deliberate, prophetic. The final marker is not only visible, it is undeniable to those who will open their hearts to see. And here lies the great psychological challenge. People see but do not perceive, hear but do not understand, because acknowledging the truth would demand transformation. It is easier to remain asleep than to wake up to the reality that demands urgency. Philosophically, every age of man has had its defining signposts. For the Greeks, it was the rise of reason. For the Romans, the march of empire. For the Enlightenment, the exaltation of human intellect. But for our age, the defining signpost is divine interruption God writing across the canvas of time, reminding us that human mastery has limits, that our science, our politics, our economies are fragile before the eternal will of heaven. And when the final sign appears, it tears through the illusions of permanence, exposing the truth that all flesh is grass, and the glory of man is but a fading flower. Psychologically, this realization unsettles us. It shakes the foundations of comfort. It forces us to confront the question that most would rather avoid. If the last sign has appeared, then what remains? The answer is simple, though terrifying in its simplicity. The only thing that remains is the event itself, the rapture. And this is why many resist acknowledging the sign, because to admit its presence is to admit our nearness to the moment when time gives way to eternity. But denial does not grant safety. Ignoring the approaching storm does not stop the rain. Pretending that the trumpet will not sound does not silence it. The only rational response when the final sign is visible is readiness. Not readiness in a shallow sense, as though it were a mere ritual, but readiness that penetrates the soul, readiness born of watchfulness, of faith anchored in truth, of lives aligned with the demands of holiness. The last sign is not given to crush us with fear, but to awaken us with clarity. It is the mercy of God that he reveals before he acts. It is the kindness of the divine that the world is not overtaken without warning. Just as Noah preached before the flood, just as prophets cried out before judgment, so too has God allowed the last sign to appear, so that none may say, "I did not know." The sign has been sounded, and the responsibility now shifts to us. So let us not trivialize what is unfolding. This is not an hour for spiritual laziness or intellectual cynicism. This is an hour for courage, the courage to accept reality, the courage to prepare inwardly, and the courage to live outwardly as witnesses to the truth. The appearance of the final sign is heaven's call to urgency, and urgency does not mean panic, it means alignment. It means ensuring that when the final trumpet does sound, we will not be found wandering but waiting, not drifting but standing, not sleeping but awake. The last prophetic signal has manifested. We cannot afford to explain it away. We cannot afford to sleep through it. We cannot afford to treat it as entertainment. For when the final sign appears, it is the announcement that history has reached its final chapter. And so I tell you with intellectual conviction and spiritual certainty, the sign has come, the stage is set, and the question is not whether God will act, but whether we are ready when he does. If indeed the last sign has already appeared, then the question before us is not one of speculation, but one of preparation. This is not a time to indulge in debates about theological fine print or to argue endlessly about whether the rapture is pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, or post-tribulation. Those matters, however intellectually stimulating, pale in comparison to the central issue: are you ready? For readiness is the dividing line between those who will be caught up and those who will be left behind. Neutrality is no longer an option. To remain undecided in this hour is, in truth, to have made a decision already. It is fascinating to observe how human beings respond to urgency. In matters of health, a diagnosis of terminal illness forces immediate changes in lifestyle, diet, and relationships. In matters of economics, a market collapse prompts panic, withdrawals, and strategies for survival. In matters of politics, the threat of war or instability brings hurried decisions, hurried alliances, hurried speeches. And yet, in matters of eternity, when the last sign has been sounded, many adopt an attitude of complacency as though heaven will wait for their convenience. But eternity does not bend to human schedules. The trumpet will not delay because you were busy, distracted, or indifferent. When the sign has appeared, readiness is no longer optional. It is the only rational response. This readiness is not to be confused with outward religiosity. Many have polished rituals, perfect attendance in sacred spaces, eloquence in prayer, and fluency in Scripture, yet their hearts remain unprepared. Readiness is not a matter of performance, it is a matter of posture. The posture of the heart, the orientation of the soul, the alignment of the will with the demands of the divine. The wise virgins in the parable were not praised because they had lamps alone. They were praised because their lamps were trimmed and their oil was sufficient. Outward symbols without inward substance are nothing more than illusions. The question is not whether you look prepared, but whether you are prepared. Psychologically, the demand for readiness confronts us with the uncomfortable reality of sacrifice. To prepare means to relinquish distractions, to discipline desires, to resist the seductive pull of temporary pleasures in favor of eternal security. Human beings by nature resist such discipline. We prefer the comfort of the present over the demands of the future. We prefer indulgence today rather than investment for tomorrow. But the call of readiness is a call to live in reverse order. It is to let the future shape the present. It is to make decisions today in light of eternity's tomorrow. Those who mock this call often accuse it of being restrictive, but in truth it is liberating. For the one who is ready does not live in fear of the unknown. He lives in confidence of the inevitable. Philosophically, readiness speaks to the tension between freedom and responsibility. We are free beings endowed with the capacity to choose, but freedom without responsibility is chaos. The last sign reminds us that freedom carries consequences. Every choice made in indifference to eternity is a choice against readiness. And what is freedom if it ends in eternal bondage? The true exercise of freedom is readiness, to choose rightly, to align voluntarily with the will of God, to prepare without coercion but with conviction. In that choice, humanity fulfills its highest purpose, not to drift aimlessly, but to stand prepared for the divine encounter. Notice also that readiness is not a one-time event, it is a lifestyle. It is not enough to have been ready yesterday if you are careless today. It is not enough to have once been faithful if you are now complacent. Just as a soldier remains alert until the command is given, just as a watchman remains vigilant until dawn breaks, so too must readiness be continuous, consistent, unrelenting. The tragedy of the unprepared is not that they did not know what to do. It is that they knew, but they delayed. They assumed there would be more time, but time is a currency not guaranteed. The last sign teaches us that the clock of history is no longer generous. It is urgent. We must also remember that readiness is not purely individual. It is communal. Your preparation strengthens others. Your vigilance awakens others. The example of your faith may be the very spark that ignites readiness in those still slumbering. Conversely, your negligence may embolden the complacency of those watching you. Readiness, therefore, is both personal and collective. When a generation chooses to be prepared, it becomes a witness to nations. When a family lives in readiness, it becomes a lighthouse in the storm. When a church embodies readiness, it becomes a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. But perhaps the greatest obstacle to readiness is distraction. Modern life is engineered to scatter the mind, to drown the soul in endless noise, notifications, headlines, arguments, entertainment, desires. In such a world, readiness requires intentional focus. It requires the courage to silence lesser voices so that the voice of eternity can be heard. It requires the discipline to step away from the trivial and invest in the essential. Readiness, then, is not passive waiting but active preparation. It is the vigilant trimming of the lamp, the continual gathering of oil, the daily alignment of the heart. And yet, let us be clear, readiness is not a burden to crush us but a gift to free us. For those who are ready, the last sign is not a source of terror but a source of hope. It is the announcement that deliverance is near, that promises are about to be fulfilled, that the long night is giving way to eternal morning. Readiness transforms the final trumpet from a sound of dread into a sound of triumph. Therefore, I say to you with conviction, the hour has come to examine yourself. Not your neighbor, not your friend, not your adversary. You, are you ready? If the trumpet were to sound tonight, would you rejoice or regret? If eternity opened its gates this very hour, would you be confident or terrified? Readiness is the answer to that question. And the time to prepare is not tomorrow, not next week, not when it is convenient. The time to prepare is now. If the final prophetic sign has already appeared, then it was not given to us merely as an item of curiosity or as a riddle for theological debate. No, signs from heaven are not designed for entertainment. They are given as alarms, as wake-up calls, as summonses to action. The appearing of the last sign is therefore not the end of responsibility, but the beginning of urgent responsibility. It is not a private revelation to be hidden in the pocket of personal comfort. It is a trumpet blast intended to awaken the sleepers and mobilize the watchmen. The question that confronts us now is simple but profound. Having seen the sign, what will we do with it? It is tempting to treat this revelation as though it were personal insurance. I am ready, therefore I need not concern myself with others. But that is a distortion of the truth. For the very reason God reveals signs is so that his people may proclaim them, not hoard them. Silence in this hour is not neutrality. Silence is betrayal. When you have knowledge of the approaching storm and fail to warn your neighbor, you share in the guilt of their destruction. To remain quiet when the last sign has appeared is to abandon the very purpose for which you were entrusted with the knowledge. This, therefore, is a call not only to awake but to awaken others. It is a summons to become the heralds of truth in a world intoxicated by lies. The nations are distracted, lulled into sleep by the opium of entertainment, by the illusion of progress, by the arrogance of self-sufficiency. But if the last sign has already appeared, then to allow them to sleep undisturbed is an act of cruelty disguised as kindness. The loving thing to do, the moral thing to do, is to disturb the sleepers, to shake them awake, to sound the alarm, to cry out, "Behold, the bridegroom comes." Psychologically, this is not easy. We live in an age where warning voices are mocked, where truth tellers are labeled alarmists, where those who stand on conviction are called intolerant. To speak of the rapture, to declare the urgency of readiness, is to risk ridicule, rejection, and isolation. But what is ridicule in comparison to eternal loss? What is the sting of rejection compared to the weight of silence when souls are perishing? Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that conviction is weightier than comfort. To proclaim the truth in the face of mockery is not fanaticism, it is fidelity. Philosophically, one might ask, why does God even require human voices when he could simply thunder from heaven? The answer lies in the mystery of divine partnership. From the beginning, God has chosen to work through human vessels. Noah preached before the flood. Jonah warned Nineveh before its destruction. The prophets cried out to Israel before its exile. And in the same way, God now calls his people to be the watchmen of this age. To refuse the call is not only disobedience, it is a forfeiture of purpose. Our highest calling is not merely to survive history, but to participate in shaping it through proclamation. Consider also that awakening others is not simply about words, it is about example. It is hypocrisy to sound the alarm with lips while living in contradiction with life. The power of proclamation lies in integrity. when the messenger embodies the message. A world that is skeptical of sermons cannot easily dismiss a life that testifies daily to the urgency of eternity. To awaken nations, we must first be awake ourselves. To shake others, we must first be unshakable. The credibility of the watchman is not in eloquence, but in consistency. This call is also communal. It is not the responsibility of a single preacher or a small circle of faithful. It is the responsibility of every believer who has seen the sign and understands its meaning. The final sign has been revealed not to scholars alone, but to the entire household of faith. And therefore, each one has a voice, each one has a sphere of influence, each one has a responsibility. Whether in families, in workplaces, in schools, or in nations, every believer is a torchbearer. And the darker the night grows, the more valuable even a single flame becomes. Let us also recognize that warning others is not an act of despair, but an act of hope. To awaken someone is not to condemn them, it is to invite them into life. It is to say, there is still time to prepare, there is still mercy available, there is still a door open before it closes. The final sign is a declaration that the door is soon to shut, but it is not yet shut, and so our task is urgent but not hopeless. We proclaim not out of anger, but out of love, not out of superiority, but out of humility, knowing that we too were once asleep until someone sounded the alarm for us. The cost of silence in this hour cannot be overstated. If those entrusted with the truth remain mute, then nations will perish in ignorance. History will record that signs were shown but warnings were withheld, and what greater tragedy is there than knowledge wasted? But the power of proclamation is equally immense. A single voice, faithful and courageous, can ignite a multitude. One watchman crying out in the night can awaken an entire city, and when many voices rise together, they become an unstoppable wave of truth that cannot be ignored.